If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a...
What?
Mii Brawler is pretty decent, all things considered. The official tier list has always had him in the top half, which is a pretty impressive marker of consistency, if you ignore the other 30 characters that have also always been in the top half. With a roster as expansive as Ultimate's, every character is bound to have at least one matchup that really tests their resolve, and Brawler's no exception. When it comes to every matchup, I'd argue Brawler beats, or at least goes even against most of the cast. But believe me, when a character has the edge on Mii Brawler, they make it really obvious. Why am I dead? Let's cover some of those pain-in-the-ass matchups, what makes them so hard, and of course, how to deal with them. Here are Mii Brawler's hardest matchups. Well, not all of his most difficult matchups, just the more interesting ones. And also maybe not the most difficult ones, just like, they're annoying, okay? Give me a break, this game is hard. Okay, so before we get into anything, let's lay down some ground rules. First, we're discussing competitive matchups, which means assuming that Brawler is using a competitive moveset, something viable. As much as I would love to get into the endless nuances of counter-throw in the Rosalina and Luma matchup, I would also like to not waste anyone's time. Not yours, and especially not mine. If a specific move is particularly effective in a certain matchup, I'll be sure to mention it, but otherwise, I'm assuming that Brawler will be running feint jump, thrust uppercut, shot put, and either suplex or burning dropkick. Second, while I do plan to focus for the most part on how Brawler approaches these matchups, I'll make a point of discussing character weaknesses in a more general sense, just to make sure everyone gets some mileage off this. Third, there's gonna be a lot of opinion. Okay, I think that covers all of our bases. First up! Oh. Shulk is perhaps the first character that people think of when they think of Brawler's hardest matchups, and it's not hard to see why. Brawler is a character that thrives on his close-range attacks, and Shulk has an absurdly long sword to keep Mii Brawler at bay, the ability to change his mobility and damage stats on the fly with Monado arts, and the single greatest anti-combo tool in the game with a shield art. Speak to any scrappy, close-range character, and they're guaranteed to have had a canon event where they had some Shulk dead to rights, only for him to go piss mode and come out unscathed. Shield art alone is an insane crutch against Mii Brawler, but that's only a fifth of his stupid-ass bag of tricks. Speed art and jump art let him dictate the hell out of the match's tempo, and once he has you where he wants you... Buster art and smash art, two modes that boost his damage and knockback respectively, can apply insane pressure, especially when Brawler's stuck in the corner. All of this combined to create a matchup where Brawler is constantly having to close in on a character that always outranges him, sometimes outspeeds him, nullifies some of his best combos, and kills at 90 the second he gets an ounce of positioning. So this is pretty bleak, but it's not completely hopeless. Let's look at what there is for Brawler in the way of counterplay. The most important thing to keep in mind against Shulk is that his attacks are what I like to call front-loaded. Let me explain. Every attack in every fighting game has three parts to it. The startup, the part that hurts, and the end lag. What I mean when I say front-loaded is that there is significantly more startup than end lag. What this means for the purpose of counterplay is that the startup can be abused for a punish. If you can get in against a move that takes a bit to get going, it's very likely that you can land your attack before they get theirs out. Shulk already has some of the slowest aerial startup in the game, but when you factor in where his aerials start and how long they take to get in front of him, their effective startup time is much, much longer. Of course, none of this matters if Shulk keeps his distance while starting these moves, but if his opponent uses the high startup to close in before blocking, well, now he's got a bit of a problem. His opponent is now much closer to him than he expected. At this range, his front-loaded attacks are at their most vulnerable. If he tries to do another attack, it's very likely his opponent will beat him to the punch. Literally. This means he has to pivot from offense to defense, and that can happen in a few ways. Shielding the incoming attack and answering back with an air slash, try and escape to a favorable position using a roll or a spot dodge, or just booking it by jumping or dashing back. None of these are the most favorable for Shulk. Pretty much all of these options put him at the receiving end of some very consistent counterplay, and while running away might spare him from getting hit, he sacrifices a ton of positioning to do so. It's also important to note that most Shulk players prefer to use only one or two of these options. So your best bet is to take notes. Keep tabs on a given Shulk player's go-to options whenever he misspaces an attack. Once you have an idea of what to expect, it's possible to create reliably favorable situations by using Shulk's long startup against him. As far as sorties go in Ultimate, Shulk suffers from a case of what I call too much gun. His range and coverage are incredible, but they come at the cost of him struggling hard in scramble situations. And just to be clear, speed art doesn't make his attacks come out faster, it just makes him harder to pin down. Actually, while I'm mentioning them in auto arts, I'll cap off this section by mentioning that shield art is the only mode that decreases in duration as he gets hit. So if a brawler sees a Shulk in shield art and opts to start wailing on him with flashing Mach Punch, it's very likely to strip him of his buff before the final hit. A fun middle finger to a character who breaks so many rules. Ugh. Sonic is a headache. When it comes to playing Mii Brawler, one of the most reliable things in his arsenal is his absurd burst range. Like, look at dash attack. The fact that Brawler can cover this much ground before the opponent can even react is frankly disgusting. So naturally, Brawler's opponent is going to assume whatever playstyle keeps him from doing that. And when it comes to Sonic, he's pretty well suited to the task. Spin Dash negates that whole burst-related game plan, just flat out. Like, yeah, it takes a bit to come out at a wonky 17 frames, but if he ever gets the time and space to clear that startup, he is instantly threatening a ridiculous amount of space. It doesn't help that he's invincible during this hop he does on release, and it extra doesn't help that fully charged Spin Dash removes that hop and takes that invincibility all the way to the bank, letting him level anything put in his path. That's before even getting into how fucking fast this guy is. He's able to whiff punish you from across the entire stage if you give him the time to do it. Trying to constantly fight Spin Dash head on is a recipe for disaster, so we'll need to be more thoughtful about how to handle it. So when Sonic uses Spin Dash, I said, when Sonic uses Spin Dash, okay, so heads up, these are two different moves. This one is Spin Dash, and this one is Spin Charge. And yes, they do fill different roles, but if I try to get into discerning which is which, we would be here all day, but you're not supposed to get hit by either of them, so we're just gonna pretend Spin Charge doesn't exist, okay? Okay. So when Sonic begins a Spin Dash, usually the opponent's impulse is to stop that shit pronto. And Brawler is no exception. Feel a Spin Dash coming? Dash attack is probably a safe bet. However, the problem with this strategy is that Brawler needs to be within his own burst range. Try running Sonic down from any further, and he'll have the time to release Spin Dash and stop the rushdown. The thing is though, Sonic cannot know if his opponent is truly trying to move in. Sonic can only react to his opponent looking like they're moving in. So if he was planning on releasing Spin Dash in response to any forwards movement, then he'll release to this movement too. Now, Sonic's release Spin Dash into shield, has dealt no damage for his troubles, and is forced to make a decision on what to do next. It is this information, what Sonic does after, that is pivotal to the matchup. If Sonic tries to stay aggressive by using things like spring or homing attack, he's putting himself at risk of very big punishes for not a lot of reward. Seriously, he's risking getting forward smashed for like 8%. If he decides to get out of there and retreat to the other side of the stage, he accomplishes nothing beyond cornering himself. This gameplay loop risks taking chip damage from Sonic in exchange for information. After enough time spin dashing through shield, habits will start to make themselves apparent, which can be exploited for openings. If Sonic likes to start charging another spin dash, anticipating that he'll be rushed down, his opponent can recognize this and start putting out hitboxes that keep spin dash from coming out. If he wants to throw out an aerial to stop an approach, it can be waited out and punished. There are unfortunately dozens of things Sonic can do to mix up his post-spin dash decision. This section could probably go on forever if I tried to list them all, but these spin dashes are going to happen, whether you like them or not. By playing in a way that minimizes the risk presented by spin dash and focusing your attention on his actions when his hand is the most forced, Sonic is forced to reconsider his spin dash heavy playstyle and play in a more honest, scrappy way. Well, at least as honest as the fastest character in the game can be. Oh, and since Sonic's game plan gets easier and easier as he extends the lead, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Brawler's survival in the matchup as well. Sonic's primary means of taking stocks is via edge guarding, and it's kind of an Occam's razor situation. Just don't get edge guarded. Stay in the center of the stage as much as possible. This was already a pretty big part of our game plan for dealing with spin dash, so hopefully it follows through here as well. Obviously, your positioning isn't always yours to decide, so if you do get launched off stage, don't get lazy about how you get back on. Always keep an eye on where Sonic is, and if he looks ready to edge guard. Sonic is an incredibly fast edgeguarder and can catch his opponent super off guard if they're not paying attention. If those offstage situations still feel devastating, look into running Burning Dropkick, which provides some extra recovery options. By doing what you can to live out edge guards and not get gimped at 35, Sonic can't ride an early stock to an easy win. Oh, stupid box. Okay, so one of these matchups is not like the others. Seeing Little Mac in a video about a character's worst matchups might seem a bit odd. This is a character almost universally considered one of the worst in the game, but being at the bottom of the tier list does not tell the full story. These low tiers got hands, man. It's hard to describe because on paper, Brawler still probably wins the matchup, if only slightly, but in practice, some things start to stand out. Firstly, Mac is a character that gets most of his mileage out of high mobility and overwhelming ground moves. That doesn't seem like a death knell at first, but once you're trying to get a feel for the matchup, it becomes very apparent that the typical Brawler game plan isn't going to get the job done. Little Mac is faster than Brawler, so Brawler's mobility means a whole lot less to the game plan than it normally does. Mac beats obvious approaches by either tanking incoming attacks with an armored smash attack, or tilt attacks that have trample, putting you in a laggy recoil animation while he continues as if nothing happens. Shielding against Mac leaves you disgustingly prone to not only shield breaks, but moves with insane pushback that spare Mac from many of Brawler's strongest out of shield options. Losing out going button for button is already pretty tough, but Brawler could still make up the difference by exploiting Mac's weaknesses. Ask any player how to beat Little Mac. What's the first thing they'd say? Edgeguard him. Chuck him off stage, intercept his double jumper side special, get him to die at 12. The same is true for Brawler, but he's not really built for that. Brawler's insanely high fall speed coupled with his low range attacks means he needs to be much more precise than most characters when trying to edgeguard Mac. Otherwise, he'll run headfirst into this, which not only stops a lot of edge guards, but also blocks shot put from taking advantage of Mac's otherwise abysmal recovery. And the juggling game isn't much fun either. Mac has an insanely fast aerial to mash out of hit stun that gets in the way of a lot of early percent combos. Even worse, his neutral specials got frame 1 light armor, meaning that thrust uppercut, Brawler's catch-all kill move off of juggles, is something that Little Mac can just opt out of. The fact a character this slow on the tier list puts up a genuine fight against Brawler is sincerely evil and slightly damaging to my ego. That being said, the matchup is possible. You just need to be prepared and patient. Really, really, really patient. Now, all that stuff I said about Little Mac scampering around like a little freak and compromising Brawler's advantage is true. However, remembering that it's Little Mac goes a long way. Even though Brawler makes it harder, catching him out on any of his tricks will still very likely lead to his death. And what's more, Little Mac's defensive options are horrible. Mac's floaty double jump and fast fall speed make it ridiculously easy to know where he's gonna land. His rolls are laggy and move him forward before he's actually invincible, leading to shit like this. And his directional air dodge is hard programmed to travel less distance than any other fighter. This leads to Little Mac generally using Little Mac specific tools to get out of disadvantage. And because Little Mac is so fragile and his options are so committal, having a grip on his timings and habits are very important to securing a kill. If a Little Mac is always using his side B at the same spot to recover, use a longer range move that covers more area, even if it doesn't send very far. Remember, stopping Mac from recovering isn't about sending him into the blast zone. It's about depriving him of his resources until he falls in himself. By kicking Mac out of his side B or double jump, he's prevented from using them again until he lands or grabs ledge. And once he loses both of them, that tends to be it. Of course, all of these situations are dependent on neutral going your way, which is easier said than done. Something that can help with this is to remember that no matter who he's up against, Little Mac is always going to be tethered to the ground. Any character with a well-rounded toolkit has two options to deal with a jumping opponent. They can either use a grounded move as an anti-air, or an aerial as an air-to-air. Little Mac, however, doesn't have aerials. They are all horrible. So, barring random Hail Marys with his special moves, Little Mac's only consistent answer to jump habits is to strike when his opponent's about to land. And he does this very well, but knowing that the danger zone is relegated to one specific part of your jump arc can really save you from panicking unnecessarily. That being said, this isn't an excuse for jumping around blindly. Little Mac will call out predictable landing habits, especially if they're right on top of him. Mix up movement and don't move in all the time. The harder you make it to tell when you're moving in, the harder a time Mac will have playing his counter hit game, and the more likely it is he makes an exploitable mistake himself. And if all else fails, you can switch to Soaring Axe Kick and spam it every time he so much as thinks about touching your shield. But I think the strategy is a bit of a hazard to the user's health, so keep it as a last resort. That's all of them. 2 hydrogen bombs and one hell of a coughing baby. I know the last one is a hard sell no matter what, but ultimately, tier gaps don't mean all that much when we're just comparing character to character. In fact, I'd go so far as to say the tier list format is kind of detrimental in this sense. Because tier lists generalize the effectiveness of each fighter, it implicitly gives off the idea that because this character is ranked 20th and this character is ranked 64th, that number 20 should win more often. And while this can be the case, treating it like a hard and fast rule can hide some truly devious matchups. Anyways, hopefully this video has been helpful. I want to give a huge thanks to the players that provided feedback on their respective characters, and Coach Ramses, who not only helped with the Shulk section, but gave a ton of insight on the Sonic game plan outlined in this video. He's one of the best coaches in the game and ended up teaching me things by accident, so I'll provide links to his Twitter and website in the description. I think it'd be cool to cover more matchups in the future, so let me know of any characters you'd particularly like to see covered. That's it for me. Subscribe or support my video making by becoming a Ko-Fi or YouTube member, yada yada, bye bye.